morning, everybody. I realize this is twice in 1 week, but we just got to have this conversation. I'm sorry, I'm having kind of a week. I want to talk to you today about the difficulty with diagnosis and some of the parenting interactions that I've had recently, or some of the ones that they come to me and complain. And there's some stuff that just needs to be clarified for patients, I think, about why and how we make a diagnosis and kind of what our role is in all of this, okay? Because here's what's happened is I've had a handful of people come into my office and say, I really hated that doctor because he told me that my child has X, but I think my child has Y because another doctor said that. And he's just a terrible doctor because he said my child has X. Okay. Reality check for so you know that I will just tell you what I think, and that's maybe part of my charm, or maybe part of why I'm annoying to some people, I don't know. A couple things. Number one, the diagnostic process is a moving target, okay? I will make a diagnosis that may change over time. It might. Sometimes we'll call something one thing because we think that's what it is, and then as the disease progresses, it becomes apparent that it's really something completely different. And those transitions happen in medicine. That is part of diagnostics. That is part of this journey. It's one of the reasons why we ask you to stick with your primary care doctor for things, because we're the ones who can follow you on that whole diagnostic timeline and get you to a point where we're pretty sure what you have, but then be prepared to change it. That's your primary care doctor's role, okay? But sometimes what we'll do, if something doesn't mesh right, is I'll send you to a specialist. I'll send you to, say, like a GI doctor so let me give you another example, okay? I have a patient who's like 9-ish, who was diagnosed with fibromyalgia a couple of years ago. Okay, that is super, super weird in this age group. I don't see school-age fibromyalgia real often. And the parents really owned this diagnosis. This is what their daughter has. The problem is that there's actually a standard of evaluation that would have had to have happened for this kid in order to make that diagnosis, and it was never done. The doctor that they were seeing, who they really like, kind of went, I think that's what you have, and stopped. They were fine with that. But as his peer and colleague, I am not fine with that. I actually don't think that's acceptable medical care. And so I started asking questions about how did we make this? What tests were done? Blah, blah, blah. And the parents were not happy with me because they had already attached to this fibro diagnosis, and I was proposing something that challenged their view of their child's illness. So it was not very popular. What was interesting was that I sent them to a specialist for an evaluation, and they did go, which was great. And that specialist actually did the same thing I did, which was to say, really? That's kind of stupid. Okay. Let's start over. Okay. Why did those parents freak out? So a couple of things. When we change your diagnosis, or when you see a new specialist, by the way, this family wasn't very nice to the specialist either. When you see a new specialist, when you see a new, rheumatologist in this case, and they challenge the diagnosis you already have, or that your child already has, this really provokes some parents. And what I'm asking is, if you are a parent of a child with chronic disease, or if you have one yourself, I want you to really examine that process, because it creates issues for your physician and ultimately for your child if we can't have a dialogue about evolving diagnosis. Why do people react badly to differing medical opinions or change in diagnosis or whatever? So, number one is, a lot of the parents in my office take their child's diagnosis on as part of their identity. Okay, this family was a family of a child with fibromyalgia. I have a lot of parents, and I love you guys, but you have identified yourself and built your entire social structure around being the parent of an autistic child, or a child with ADHD, or a child with chronic GI disease, or whatever it is. You have built this identity for your child and your identity in some ways around your child's illness, which I love that you own it and I love that you support them, but I would just caution you against that degree of attachment to a single diagnosis. Because autism, ADHD, GI problems, fibromyalgia are all things that we can diagnose at one point and then look at your child 2 years later and say, wow, something has evolved. Not that we missed it, but literally your child evolves. That's what kids do. And now I'm not so sure that diagnosis is accurate. Or on the flip side, we can say, well, that doctor was an idiot. There's actually a national standard on how we evaluate this. They didn't follow it. Let's get you the right workup. And then we change everything. Okay. But for my parents who've grasped this diagnosis as an identity, this really challenges them. This process of diagnosis evolution is really challenging. And I think for two reasons. Number one is what you hear me say, what parents will hear is all of this stuff you've done up until this point was wrong and was wasted effort. And particularly for families with autism, hearing that all those hours that you spent in speech therapy, OT, ABA, God knows what, hearing that may not have been the ideal treatment really hits a nerve, because it really has sucked up your whole life. Even if it's not your identity, it still sucks up your whole life. And that for people gets a really gut response. It's very negative. The other thing is, okay, so another patient story. This was actually a really long time ago. I had a patient who had been diagnosed with some milk protein enteropathy. So some sort of milk protein intolerance. Started having diarrhea when they switched him over to cow's milk at 1. And so they said, don't ever do that again. And this kid wasn't allowed to have milk. And then at some point he got old enough where he could eat stuff that mom wasn't completely watching him. And she rushed him into my office because he'd apparently had ice cream at a birthday party when she wasn't watching, and oh my God, something bad's going to happen, and whatever. And so what I did was I chased this diagnosis down. I said, okay, tell me about this diagnosis, because milk protein enteropathy in a big kid is actually really kind of weird. And so here's the bottom line. This kid doesn't have a milk intolerance. It wasn't the milk that was causing diarrhea when he was a toddler. It was the absolutely excessive amount of juice that this kid was also drinking. That was causing the child's diarrhea. And they'd had similar symptoms with sugar later, but mom was so fixated on this milk protein thing, and it had become part of her. She every restaurant they went to was a thing. They had restricted places they go, and going to family members' houses who weren't helpful with this intolerance. And to learn that all of that was wasted time was really, really hard for her. And the other thing that was really hard for her was, when I tell you, hey, your child's chronic diarrhea is actually due to the amount of juice you gave him, I'm basically telling you it's your fault. I mean, I will couch it nicer than that. Parents, we all make mistakes. We all do things that have short-term negative effects on our kids. That's the reality of parenting. But I'm kind of still telling you it's your fault. That you were part of the cause of this. And that for this mom was absolutely more than she could handle. Absolutely sent her over the edge. She was so angry that I actually sent her to a GI doctor who made this same diagnosis that I had. And she, as far as I know to this day, still restricts her child's milk intake because she believes that he's intolerant. Because she can't accept that. We had to change his diagnosis because his diagnosis no longer exists. And so this is one of those things where she got overly attached to the words that describe what her child has and kind of missed the point, which is that we give you a diagnosis to give you a name so that when I talk to your specialist, we're talking about the same thing and we understand each other's perception. Okay. But your diagnosis is not a predictor of your outcome necessarily, and it's not your identity. And what I find is that when kids' diagnoses change, even kids who have stuff that we know changes, like kids who have cancer and then they're cured, they're in remission. In that family, that kid has really taken on the role of the sick child, and the whole family dynamic has kind of revolved around this kid being sick. And then when this kid becomes a well child again, like taking all that apart is actually really hard for people. And so I think one of the other things that happens is, for instance, we'll tell you, your kid's like ringing some buzzers on the autism spectrum. We need to get this evaluated. And somehow you get the autism diagnosis, and then you see developmental pediatrics, and they're like, this is not autism. And that like completely blows everybody away. Because one, it may be behavioral, in which case what you heard one of the developmental folks say is, this is your fault. Number two is you may have a perception of your child's functionality that's very different than what the doctor has. Okay. I've had patients who parents tell me this causes 10 out of 10 abdominal pain. But then I see the kid after they eat the thing that causes the pain, and the kid's fine. What happens is mom says 700 times, does your belly hurt? Does your belly hurt? Does your belly hurt? And eventually the kid says yes, so she shuts up. Okay. So look, my job is to take the scientific information that you give me and tell you the disease process your child has. This is an imprecise science. It is also performed by people who do it badly. Okay, there are bad doctors out there. There are people who are still practicing medicine like it's 1985 in El Paso, by the way. There's some scary stuff that happens here. Just take my word for that. So often I am the voice of change, and sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing. Some of my specialist friends have it even worse than I do. My job is to give you a diagnosis. And then my job is to change that diagnosis if your child's situation evolves. If they look like they're autistic when they're 2, but when they're 5, they look like something different, we're going to call it something different. Okay? And if you have been mom of autistic child for 3 years and you lose your mind because, you know what, actually, this might not be autism. It might be this completely other thing. We're not telling you your kid's perfectly normal, first of all. Second of all, we're not telling you you wasted your time because your treatment got him there. That's how you got that evolution, was all the work you did. And then we're not challenging your identity as a child with special needs. We're just giving you a different label. So I just ask for myself and for my peers who really do struggle with this issue, when you get news from a doctor that you don't like, okay, whether it's your kid does not, in fact, have lactose intolerance or milk protein enteropathy, they have too much juice, or whether it's your workup for fibromyalgia was completely inadequate and we got to do this all over again because I don't think that's what you have. That. Or if it's, I know you were diagnosed with this by one specialist, but another specialist really disagrees with that diagnosis, and then they can tell you why. If you find a visceral reaction happening, that gut reaction of anger, I ask you to do this. stop and say, what is it about this change that bothers me? What is it about this new diagnosis? And please give 5 minutes to the idea that the doctor might be right, even if they're an idiot. Give them 5 minutes. And the process I need my parents to go through is, what is it about this change that's pushing an emotional button inside of me? Is it that I've spent so much time on this that I've become kind of an advocate for this disease and now it's not actually what we have? Is it that you're telling me that it's my fault because I gave the kid too much juice, or because my discipline style is not compatible with the child that I was given and it's causing behavioral problems? What is the driver behind that anger? Because it's not productive. And I'm going to be straight with you. You are not helping when this becomes about your reaction. Doctors do not make diagnosis for fun, and we do it in good faith with the assumption that you're going to take the information we give you and kind of work into your life. But it's not my job to tell you what you want to hear. It's not my job to reaffirm your belief that your unique snowflake of a child is a genius. This has happened to a friend of mine recently, where parents perceive their kid to be like super, super smart. He's not. I'm sorry. He is probably in the savant range of autism, where he's got like one genius spike, but everything else is really low functioning. And that for parents was really, really, really difficult. And they got really, really mad at the person who told them that. And she was totally right. The specialist was totally right. But it challenged their view of their child. It challenged the role that they had established for their child in the house as the genius, misunderstood child. And now they're kind of having to grieve this process all over again. And it created a great deal of anger. What I don't want you to do is walk away from any doctor thinking that doctor's an idiot when they simply didn't tell you what you wanted to hear. Okay? Because again, you pay me to keep you healthy. You don't pay me to keep you happy. I don't need to make you, I'm not going to reaffirm everything that you do as a parent. That's not going to happen. But what I can do is tell you what you're doing really well, tell you where I see problems, and help you change them. And I promise you, your doctor does this without that subtext in the back of their head, she's a terrible parent. Oh my God, she's awful. We don't do that. That's not what doctors do. We see a problem and we help you fix it. And we celebrate with you when problems resolve. So, again, if you've been given a diagnosis and then that diagnosis gets revised, or if you've been given a diagnosis that implies that you're part of the problem, like the fabulous juice family, one, please don't shoot the messenger, okay? Number two, take it as impartial input. You can do with it whatever you like, but take a look at why. Why is this triggering me? Why is this making me so angry? And it may give you some insight on what your child's disease means to you and how you practice. Hi, Jenny. So here's what I'm going to ask you, though, okay? And I want you to think about this really objectively for a second. What would it mean if your girls weren't on the autism spectrum? What would that mean? Would it change who they are and what they are? Or would it just change their label? And why does changing their label bother you? By the way, you don't owe me any of those answers, okay? That's totally cool. But what is it about them not being on the autism spectrum that would be problematic if hypothetically it were true? And I'm not telling you they aren't, by the way. I have like literally no idea. But even if they are, there's something in that psychological process of processing what would this mean that is going to be useful for you in understanding how their autism impacts you as a parent. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Because yeah, there's some crazy crap that happens in this town. I'm not even gonna lie to you. Again, fibro family, seriously lost my mind. There are bad doctors in this town. There are doctors that need to evolve their practice. I'll absolutely agree to that. But sometimes that was the first doctor you saw, not the second one. And so then we get into this problem of who is better diagnostically and who told you what you wanted to hear. And I'm sorry, if you've watched videos or met me ever, you know that I will just say kind of what I think. I just ask you to explore that a little bit. Write it out, journal it out, whatever you got to do, but explore that process. Because that's exactly the reaction that I hear. And more times than not, the doctor they're mad at is probably right. Okay, so I wonder what it would mean to you if your girls weren't autistic. I would think that'd be a good thing. But it's not. Just try to understand why that's not a good thing. Okay? That's all I ask. And then, by the way, if you get mad at me, I kind of don't really care. Again, you pay me to keep you healthy, not happy. I'm not the right doctor for everything. Yeah, so Jenny, that's exactly it. There's this evolution of diagnosis. So I'm gonna take a shot that it may be that early on, either your doctor wasn't ready to call autism, or because we're weird about that, and that's like socially not acceptable, but it is what it is. I could write a book. And then over time, as they aged, autism can become more obvious. And so then, it's not that they were wrong, it's just that things changed over time. Okay, let me tell you about my oldest, by the way. Anxiety, forever anxiety. Finally found him a fabulous therapist. Shannon Sawyer, by the way, if anybody needs one, she's awesome. She's amazing. Fixed the anxiety issues. Unroofed ADHD. Are you kidding? Put him on meds. After much processing for me about what it means for my child to have ADHD and this not to have all been anxiety and how did I miss this, that was like a thing. ADHD treated. Oh, there are the autism spectrum behaviors that I never recognized before. He evolves over time. And so if you'd met him when he was 4, you'd have never said autism spectrum. Meeting him at 12, he's quirky. That's all I'm going to say. He's fantastic and brilliant and wonderful. But I do see these evolutions, and we get so mad at one doctor for calling it something else. And it provokes this very visceral response in us that's probably not real productive. So yeah, it's a process. I do agree. But it's also possible that maybe some treatments you got along the way unroofed some things that weren't as visible to that first doc. It's also possible that that first doctor is an idiot. And that's always possible. And that there was an equal chance that when the later doctors said, your kids are autistic, that you could have flipped out and been like, no, they didn't say it was autism, and so it's not, and I'm really angry. That also happens. So I appreciate your ability to evolve with your kid's diagnosis as it was unroofed, as it kind of became more apparent to you. Because that's really, if you're hearing this, that's really what I need from parents, is just the ability to adapt and evolve, the ability to continue seeking answers, understanding that some of those are not going to be what you wanted to hear. Okay? I hope that that's helpful. It's definitely needed, even if you don't like hearing it, it's definitely needed that we got to kind of let go of some of our attachment to our diagnosis and just be what we are. Even if that's a kid that drinks too much juice, or the kid who was called fibromyalgia and probably has lupus. Yeah. That transition is really important for us to make in a functional way. And if you're finding that you're stuck with this, I will refer you. Yeah, Jenny, you would be amazed at the people who I tell them, like, I'm a little worried your kid's autistic. And they flip because somehow I'm saying something about them. Like it's like it reflects on them. And that parenting thing, they get all tied up in it. It's crazy. People who deny their kids special ed because they don't want the label, that's not about your kid, that's about you. Seriously, these things happen. One of the things that I think we can do to help this is, one, to be really honest about our diagnostic evolution. And number two is help people understand that autism in particular is not like a death sentence. Reference anti-vaxxer talks in the past, by the way. Yeah, it's crazy and I'll pass it. That's the only thing that I can say. If you have gotten a diagnosis that's put you in this position of kind of reanalyzing your role as a mom of the sick child, and you want to talk about it, I'm happy to talk about it, and we can kind of go through this and figure out exactly what's going on and where the issues are. Or go talk to Shannon Sawyer, because she really is one of my favorite human beings in the whole world. A good therapist is really hard to find, especially for children, and she truly helped my kid become who he is. And I just, like, my gratitude for her is immense. My gratitude for the third grade teacher who knew that he had ADHD is immense, because they called stuff out to me that I didn't see. And I got really mad. And Mrs. Zepeda was right. So, yeah, it was kind of a parenting process for me too. Doctors are parents too. Ooh, who knew? Okay, I'm going to go and see if my first patient is here. I am surviving the light switch flipping. If you saw the video from this morning, honestly, there's nothing wrong in my house. It's just that he's learned to reach the light switches. Good times. PM me if you want to talk or comment on this, and we can have a conversation about how these things kind of evolve over time and how we can think about diagnosis a little bit differently. I am always here, even if you just want to scream about a bad doctor, because I can commiserate the crap I see in my office. It's like, hope you guys have a good weekend. I will talk to you probably next week. Something else will happen, I'm sure, that like sets me into a tailspin, and I need to share it with you guys. Enjoy your weekend. I love talking to you. Thank you, Jenny, for watching and responding, because it's really boring to talk to myself. Bye.